All right, let's get right into it, man. I'm watching a show that I always watch called Jubilee, and this is one of my favorite shows on YouTube. You get what I'm saying? And this is about, they basically do like a 1v20 thing, debates and stuff like that, and this one is about, it's one atheist versus 25 Christians. This dude name is Alex O'Connor, so I'm gonna start off like this, bro. I don't trust anybody that don't believe in something, bro. I just can't. If you're an atheist, bro, I can't trust you. Something's up with you. Like, what led you to the point where you just believe in nothing, no higher power? I don't really understand that. There gotta be something. I don't care what it is, bro. You gotta know this. I mean, the way this stuff is created out here, bro, trees, just the way that the earth is formed, all the places on the earth, all the things that we use, material we use, and you saying that just happened when rocks colliding or something like that? Like, come on, bro. And then y'all believe it's a perfect sphere. Two rocks collided made a perfect sphere. Where can you recreate that? Where can you recreate that? Anyway, man, I'm gonna get right into this video, bro. I'm not gonna waste no time. I like these type of videos, debate.
By 25 Christians who, God willing, might be able to change my mind. My first claim is that suffering makes God's existence unlikely.
That's a crazy take.
Good work.
Hey, Alex, how's it going?
How's it going? Nice to meet you.
Sage. Why don't you just begin? Why does suffering or evil make God's existence unlikely?
I think when confronted with two hypotheses, so atheism, naturalism, or theism, we should ask what we expect would occur under either hypothesis. And then we look at the world and we see what does actually occur. And what do we find? We find, I think most relevant here, a system of natural selection, the mechanism by which God apparently chose to bring animals and ultimately human beings into existence. A system which is defined by suffering. Survival of the fittest is the same thing as the death and suffering and destruction of the unfit. I'm told that the very mechanism that God chose to bring about the human species as the ultimate end of his creation was one that is imbued with suffering, such that 99.9% of all the species, let alone animals, that have ever existed on planet Earth have been brutally wiped from existence into extinction. And I think that that's less likely on theism. If you assume atheism or materialism, not only do you explain this, you also come to expect it.
What is your, epistemology? How do you know it?
I just don't. The fact that you say, God can't exist because of there's so much suffering, like, I can't understand why people, I think it's people just, I turn my mic off. People just don't really read the Bible. They've never read it. They've only read what quotes the pastor put on the big screen or something like that. They never actually took time to read it front to back. I've read it front to back a few times. You get what I'm saying? And God was not a friendly God. He was not, somebody to play with like that. He had a lot of vengeance. He was very jealous. He called himself a jealous God. He killed a lot of people, a lot of nationalities. He flooded the whole earth. Like, he destroyed everything except for about 7 people, like, and a couple, animals here and there. So what do you expect? Like, and a lot of this suffering and a lot of this tragedies and stuff we go through, it was self-inflicted from the beginning. It was self-inflicted. He gave us a choice to be perfect, literally, or where we at now, where we have the freedom of choice, the freedom to do what we want, and we chose wrongly. We chose to bite that apple. You know what it is. But yeah, anyway, I'm too tired to even think about that. But I can't understand like people that believe like God is just rainbows and sunshine and flowers. Like, no, bro. He will kill, and he's had told people to kill. He has told people to enslave. He has told people to take over this land, take over these people, we know that. If you read, it's there. So why are we acting like he's just, the friendliest God? Like, he's not.
this is the case, that it's less likely, and that, you know, an atheist worldview, a naturalistic worldview would look like the way it is today?
Of course, we don't know, but that's why I use the phraseology of unlikely. I think that if you were to tell somebody who was sort of in some Rawlsian state of nature, hadn't seen the world, and you said that the world has been created by an omnibenevolent, all-powerful God, what kind of world would that person be imagining? And if you dropped them into the world, if you were given the opportunity to become a wild animal, like in 2 seconds, I was just going to turn you into a random wild animal somewhere on planet Earth. I
like being a guy.
I think you'd probably kill yourself before I had the opportunity, because you know that the life of these animals is almost defined in terms of their suffering.
I guess I just don't really see how you can justify that claim per se. What I would say is that if we actually take into account the holistic view of the scriptures, which I do think that you have to do, we see that it's actually much more coherent once you acknowledge that evil itself doesn't have ontology. Evil's not a thing. You don't look under a rock and say, there's the evil, right?
Fine by
and
me. So I'm not really talking about evil here, because that's, of course, a moral term. I'm talking about suffering.
Can you distinctualize suffering and evil?
So evil is a moral term. Evil means that something is bad, it's immoral. You need to have a moral ontology for that. Suffering is just any experience that's not wanted when experienced, right? And so even if you don't have a moral objectivism, you can still say that suffering exists. So here's a question. A deer gets its leg caught under the branch of a tree that's fallen over in the wild, and it starves to death in confused agony. Why does God oversee this? And why does God set the natural world up such that...
Bro, so let's say he basically saying, like, if you rollerblading down a steep hill and this is your first time rollerblading, and as you're skating and you start to trip, lose your footing, and then as you're falling, he expects God to just put his hand there and lift your body back up, right? Like, come on, bro. Like, and do that to everybody that's at every time at one time. Like, let's be real, dog. Like, come on, dog. Like this is like, people like this are just so sensitive and so soft, like just so soft.
That events like this occur.
Well, because the ultimate view here is that...
Okay, pause.
Nice to meet you.
He seems like a little snobby little asshole.
How's it going? Nice to meet you too.
Okay, so my first question to start out with is, what exactly about suffering makes this unlikely on the condition that God exists?
Exactly.
I think that if God is all loving, then he probably wouldn't want his creatures to...
He's not all loving. I need y'all to stop playing with God, bro. He's not all loving. He said he's hated people. He called certain nations in the Bible an abomination. Google that word. Like, he said he's hated people, races of people. Like, he put people in slavery. He said, I'm going to destroy everything on here. He had to send his son down here to not destroy everything. He didn't turn everybody to a pillar of salt. Like, come on, bro. Like, stop acting like... Where do people get this thing where he's all loving? Where has he ever said that, bro? He's never said that. Like, y'all need to stop, bro.
Suffer, and so I think that the fact that they do suffer makes his existence less likely.
Okay, perfect. And is there some specific aspect of suffering that you're particularly honing in on, horrendous or whatever
in
that is?
particular, non-human animal suffering? Because I think that the Christianity has a celebrated tradition of theodicies trying to explain why suffering exists.
Yeah.
Human free will, the development of the soul, higher order goods, all of this kind of stuff, none of which apply to the suffering of non-human animals.
Have you heard of the axiological expectation mismatch problem?
I have not.
Okay, so philosophers of religion have started to understand that the thing that actually generates a problem between God and suffering is actually the value system you attach to the very attribute of perfect lovingness. Because the problem of evil is an internal critique, you have to look at a very specific version of theism and how it defines perfect lovingness. I want to present to you a version where my version of perfect lovingness does not actually constitute a problem and a misalignment, that mismatch between the suffering of...
I ain't gonna lie, like, I'm looking at Buddy Chain, and like my shit used to look just like that, and looking at it just looked it's so skinny. It looked so ignorantly like long pause, like it hangs too long pause, and to be that small, like it kind of looked that's why I took some of the links off of mine, because it's like I ain't like how long it looked. Mine was actually longer than that for a little while too, but anyway.
the profusion of suffering of animals
Great.
and existence of God.
So let's hear it. What kind of God are we imagining that would allow and oversee and do nothing to prevent billions of years of untold animal suffering?
Right, so you're talking about non-prevention.
Or setting up the system that is natural
Animals,
selection,
the
such
least
that
important
it
thing,
relies
bro.
upon things like predation
Yeah.
and disease.
Well, the first part is I don't agree with the whole setting up the system part. So I'm not one of those theists that believes that God does this select and pick idea of creating worlds. I don't think that God actually creates worlds. I think that God lets worlds develop according in a certain way, but because God can oversee an overarching narrative, he knows exactly how he can redeem anything. The first time, sorry, go ahead.
Could God have made it such that animals were all herbivores instead of carnivores and omnivores? for
Yes, he
example?
could totally do that.
Okay,
but
so had he done that, here's an instant way to reduce by orders of magnitude the amount of suffering that exists.
Right, but hold on.
Soft.
That's particularly assuming a value theory already that I haven't told you I'm adopting that has a problem with the evil. So I have to give you my value theory first for you to show that misalignment.
Okay, let's hear it.
Perfect. Okay.
He's making like animals just as important as us. I hate when people do that. It's also like animals is like humans. Animals like there's no comparison, bro. Like, I don't get this.
So my value theory says that it's not the most important thing about a sentient creature is not what merely happens to them. It's about the total timeline of their life and how and where their life permanently ends. Meaning, if you were to judge an author of a narrative and the first few chapters, let's say, there's a lot of bad things happening, but the end ends with this crescendo where there's victoriousness, there's redemption, there's beauty, and everyone in the story actually endorses their entire existence that they live. They can look at their they can look at their total timeline, and they actually each subjectively come to the conclusion, I'm glad I was made, and I totally see what my suffering was for. That's the particular I'm using with. So we have to judge, like John Hicks says, we have to judge the very nature of God's lovingness by what he does in the end, not these few time slices that we observe right now. For you to show that there's a problem, you have to show to me that the suffering of animals cannot be transformed, are intrinsically cut off from being transformed into a life that they will endorse. There's a couple of theses on the table.
Okay.
But sure, go ahead.
Okay, so are you talking about the end of their life is in their end of life on Earth, or are you talking about the afterlife?
I'm antemortem, postmortem.
Because if you're just talking about life on Earth, then I would say that if you had an author writing a
lost
book and a
me there,
character,
bro.
if we were trying to figure out the relationship between that,
I don't know about animal afterlife. Like, that's the thing, too. Like, y'all making animals just as important as human beings. Like, that was never meant to be the case. Like, I don't, bro. Yeah, people be making up their own, like, theories and their own ways of looking at the scripture, bro. Like, ain't no animal afterlife, bro. Get that out of here, bro.
that author and the person in the book. And that person
I'm
in
too
the
tired to
book
be
shows
dealing
up for
with this,
5
bro.
seconds in the first
I'm
chapter
too
and is a
tired for
child
this,
who
bro.
almost immediately...
Of course, yeah, you would prefer that.
So then if God can bring about the good stuff without the bad stuff,
Right.
then there's no reason to bring about the bad stuff.
Right.
So what we have to show is why the bad stuff is necessary to bring about the good stuff. Otherwise, it's not justified.
Right. Well, could you say that the result of why we suffer is because of fall of man?
I would say not, because I don't
Right,
believe in the
that's
fall
right.
of man.
True, true,
But I also don't think that that explains non-human animal suffering. The big thing that I want to keep pressing is that the theodicies that we talk about, free will, fall of man, all of this kind of stuff,
Right.
I don't think applies to that deer with its leg caught under the branch that's dying in confused agony. What's this
Do you
for?
So
really care
what
about
is
a
it about
deer
animals
dying
that
doing
seems so
free will?
like more important than a human?
It's not that they're more
Exactly.
important. It's that, as you say, like it seems
Yo, shout
plausible
out
at
to the
least that a
black
human
queen
can
right here,
suffer
bro.
and
Shout
then
out
be
to
sort
the
of better
black
off
queen,
for it,
yeah.
or that they can enjoy poetry of suffering, the
Right.
poetry of suffering. Animals can't do that.
Right.
Animals can't enjoy the poetry of suffering.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't know. I never like talked to an animal and said like, hey, like,
I have. They just haven't talked back. Is the problem. But I just don't see why we would expect that God would oversee this system of
Right.
natural selection.
Right, but there-
Billions of animals suffering and dying, predation, disease, eating
Right.
each other alive, leaving each
Right.
other to bleed out on the
Right.
floor, and this is being supervised by an all-loving God.
well, do you think that's God's
All of
intention
God
from the very
again.
beginning of creation of all things?
I think that God oversees the mechanism. God could have made it, for example,
Right.
one example that I've already given is that God could have made animals herbivores, which just eliminates the problem of predation.
I mean, there are some animals that are.
There are, but he could have made more of them. He could have made all by eliminating the suffering of predation.
So is the issue of
Predation
them eating each other?
That's one issue. That's one way that God could have sort of,
You
I think,
soft
quite trivially
boy.
reduced the amount of suffering. David Attenborough once said
Soft
of his
boy.
documentaries, people who complain that we put too much violence in the documentaries should see what we leave in the cutting room floor. The animal world is just filled with unimaginable suffering. Just predation is
But there's
don't
also
care,
cute
bro.
things about like,
Like-
otters holding hands so they don't
That's
I
true.
don't
slip away.
understand why we gotta always cater to these people. Like, just say, I don't care, bro. I don't care about animal suffering. Like, I don't care that much. You can. I don't care. Most people don't care, bro. When you see a mosquito, I'm sure if he's seeing a mosquito on him, he gonna like, come on, bro. I'm done with this guy, bro. Already.
Way.
But
All
could you have
right,
that without the
guys,
suffering?
pause,
That's the
pause.
question. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Next claim is that God
The next
commands
prompt.
genocide in the Bible.
Yes, he does.
Hey, how's it going? Nice to meet you.
Right. This is a bummer of a claim, right? Like when you look at scripture, right?
I agree.
There's a myriad of problematic things we see in scripture, from genocide to misogyny to slavery, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that we find genocide in scripture. I would argue, though.
So you agree with my claim?
Yeah, I think it's in scripture. Yeah, I mean, I think it's in there.
Okay,
right?
well, thanks for watching, everyone.
Yeah, this is good.
Right.
good
Like,
stuff.
I'm
So,
done with this
I mean, but here's
question,
what-
like, I'm sorry, God. He wanted to start off the first question with, God is all loving, and then your next one is He made genocide. So it's like you contradicting yourself a little bit, bro. Like you what is He, all loving, or is He like, y'all don't read the Bible enough, bro. Y'all not really paying attention to what's in the Word for real. So yes, there was genocide. Moving on. I'm finna even skip this because it's like it's no point of sitting on this question.
My next claim is that there is insufficient
That's
evidence
fine.
to believe in the resurrection.
Let's see how they.
Okay.
Nice to meet you.
How's it
Sit
going?
down, boy.
This is a really interdisciplinary question for the
Okay.
resurrection of Jesus. And in my experience, it kind of boils down into two categories.
Mm-hmm.
The prior probability of the resurrection of Jesus and the data itself.
So what I'm really interested in is the historical case for the resurrection of Jesus.
Okay, I want to ask a clarifying question because I would love to talk about the data. But if I were to give you a model of the Gospels that I would call like the historical reportage model, which would say something along the lines of the authors of the Gospels were close to the times and places of the historical Jesus. They rooted their historical work in eyewitness testimony and did not feel the freedom to make up historical facts. Because of that, we can extract all the testimonies from these Gospels, and we have access to what the original eyewitnesses actually said and did.
Okay, so
right?
who do you think are the eyewitnesses that the testimony is being based on?
So this is where I'm not a walking encyclopedia, but I would say if you looked at all the testimonies, we have 21 unique testimonies that are going to be polymodal in nature. They're going to have semblances of independence and interdependence and some dependence because of the synoptic problem, all that stuff. If we were to get there, would that be enough for you to say the probability that the resurrection happened relative to any other countering theory is higher?
No.
Bro, my thing is, I'm not here to convince anybody of anything. Like, I'll tell you what I believe, and I can care less if you believe it or not. Like, I really don't care. I'm done trying to convince people of certain things. There's certain things I believe in that I used to post a lot. Flat Earth, conspiracy things, all of this stuff I used to post, and I really don't care no more, bro. Like, I don't care what you know, what you do is what you do with your life, bro.
I don't think so.
So that tells
got
me
every right
then
to believe
that
what you want.
one, it could be the prior probability still. That's an issue. Because if that's not enough evidence,
It's not that. I think that
I
the
couldn't even have
authors
this
of the
debate 'cause, like, I don't
Gospels,
care, bro.
specifically on the resurrection, can't be trusted
So
to
you
be giving
believe
an
it or
accurate
not?
account of what happened.
yeah, that's why I'm
believing in
asking if we
this
had this historical reportage model,
like-
and that was true.
Sure, well,
that would be
if it were true
the
that they were reporting
biggest
historical
thing
events, then it would be a
there
historical
is,
event,
so-
yeah.
So let me clarify.
I don't think that they
yeah,
are.
Yeah, I get where you're coming. Let me clarify one thing here. The historical reportage model does not entail what the reporting actually happened. All I'm saying is that we can extract from there is that these were the actual eyewitness testimonies to the risen Jesus.
Okay, so I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you think that Jesus is the only person, outside of the people that Jesus and the apostles rose from the dead, do you think that he's the only person in human history that's risen from the dead?
Yes.
Okay, so Matthew's gospel, in Matthew chapter 27, says that at the time of the death of Jesus, the graves of Jerusalem opened, and the holy ones got out of their graves, and then, interestingly says, then after the resurrection, appeared to many. Many
Yeah.
of them walked around appearing to many. Do you think that that happened?
So I would just say that if the historical
Let me
Many
read
of them
that.
walked
Let
around
me
their
read
graves,
that.
and then
And the graves were open, and many bodies of the saints which slept arose and came out of the graves after his resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared unto many. Okay.
interestingly says, then after the resurrection, appeared to many.
And see,
Many of
Buddy said he didn't believe what he said. Do you believe that Jesus was the only one that rose from the dead? He said yes. And that lets you know he don't really read, because just that right there is in the Bible. It shows you that there was many other people that did it. Then that's the answer. Yes, other people rose from the dead. What's the problem? You know, they were obviously insignificant, honestly. Like, and I believe in the Old Testament, Elijah, he rose from the dead, or he didn't. I don't think he died. I think he went into, if I remember, like he just went into the sky in a chariot, something like that. But you know, don't fact check me. You know.
Them walked around appearing to many. Do you think that happened?
So I would just say that if the historical reportage model is
He's
true,
in the cat right now.
then yes.
So you think?
But hold on, the problem there is those are also talking about resuscitations most
problem.
likely,
Just
not
trying to
resurrections.
Yeah, but what we're
It's like
talking
so
about here
convincing.
is the
Just be
graves of
real.
Jerusalem opening and many people getting out of their graves, walking around Jerusalem
Sure.
and appearing to
If
many
I
people.
say yes, what's at stake
If
there?
this happened, this would be the most extraordinary event that's ever happened in human history. And yet,
And then you're going to make
it
an
is
argument
not
from silence
reported-
from there.
Some arguments from silence do work. It is
I
not
understand
reported.
that, but then
Hold on,
that's
hold on.
only one
It's-
piece of
it's not
evidence that you're
reported
gonna use.
anywhere else. It's not reported in any of the other Gospels.
What's up, black man?
The resurrection, as you know, is the single most important issue in Christianity.
Facts.
If it doesn't happen, as Paul would say, then none of this matters.
Yep.
If it did happen, then everything matters and
Oh, yes.
everything becomes much more important. Do you believe that the disciples of Christ, Paul as well, and others, believed that Christ rose from the dead?
I think that's probably the case.
Okay, so you believe that they truly believe, not that they
Yeah.
just made it up.
But can I
that
ask
they
why you believe that they believed it?
Sure. Well, wait. I would say they believed it because it happened. That's how I would
Okay,
say,
fine.
yes,
But how
of
do you
course.
know that they actually believed it?
How do I know that they believed it?
Yeah, how do you know that
Through
they
their
believed? How do you know that they
writings.
weren't lying, for example?
Because they were executed for it. So, for instance,
How were they executed?
some of them were executed by being sawed in half. Some of them were executed by being beheaded.
How do you know that?
Well, through obviously the tradition and the historicity of the church.
Well, those are two things. There's tradition and there's historicity.
Well, no. So the tradition of the church, the idea is that when you say church tradition or holy tradition, it's not just this idea that, oh, we're just saying things and making things that are in line with Christianity.
Sure.
But it's actually this idea that we are following the trail and the lineage of
Sure.
Christianity.
What
closely.
I'm looking for is evidence of the apostles' martyrdom for their claim that Jesus had risen from the dead. Only 2 disciples' deaths are recorded in the Gospels. That's Judas, who
Sure,
hangs himself,
yes.
or there's another contradiction. He either hangs himself in Matthew, or in the book of Acts, he's described as falling over in a field with his headlong
falling
and his,
over,
and
not
his,
falling
and his
over.
guts spilling out. Right? It
Yes.
seems to be a difference. So Judas, also James, the brother of John, who's beheaded by Herod. We're not told precisely why. Every single other death of the apostles relies solely
Yes.
on church tradition. There is no historical evidence that they were martyred, and certainly not that they were martyred for their belief that Jesus was resurrected. In fact, even according to church tradition, the only person, the only disciple, the only apostle that was not martyred for his faith, do you know who it was?
John.
John, the
Oh,
one
yes,
who
but-
makes the most theologically fantastical claims of all of the apostles.
But obviously, we know that also by the tradition that they tried to kill John by boiling him in oil.
I don't see any evidence that this actually happened outside of church tradition. And
Bro, I just want to say this, right? Like, the reason I believe in, let's just call it a higher power for now. Like, the reason I believe in that is because when I look outside and how just unique everything is to itself, like, there's really nothing that's the same as the next thing. Like, everything has its own personality. Like, everything has its own meaning, its own abilities, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's structured a certain way to not be like the next thing, like, and that's just like anything out there that's alive or anything out there that's stationary, you know, everything has a purpose. And I feel like we have a purpose on this earth. Like, without there being a higher power, it's like we are purposeless. Like, what is the purpose of being alive? Why not everybody just skydive, climb Mount Everest, like rock climb, and do the most like daredevilish thing? Because it don't really matter. Like, the world don't really matter. Our lives don't really matter. And I feel like I have a spirit as well. Like, I just feel like there's something in me I talk to myself constantly. I feel pain. I'm talking about on you feel mentally, like you feel mentally pain. You feel things, and everything is mental. It's not really physical. You have a body, but you feel things. You feel shame. You feel hurt. You know what I'm saying? Like, you feel these things. And it's like, if so there got to be a God, because I feel purposeful. I feel like there's a meaning for my life, and I'm here to fulfill my purpose, Look, I know there's a God when I look at my kids, like, two rocks, Big Bang, they don't create that. Little bacterias and things they taught us in school that millions of years later became humans. Why is that not still happening? Monkeys, why are monkeys not still turning into humans now? Like, what do? We gave him I don't know. Did we give him something like Plan Bs, or I don't know. Like, it don't make sense that they still not evolving into humans, or these bacteria still not coming out the water and first turning into mermaids and then turning into humans. Like, why is that not going on today? So I think people choosing not to believe in something higher than them. They feel it, bro. You gotta feel it. Like, you gotta feel like there's something better than you, bigger than you, and that created everything, You gotta feel that way. But I think this the most, like, craziest way to be rebellious. Like, it's just a rebellious thing, It's being a rebel, because you know better, You probably just feel like there's no real consequence for not believing in a higher power. That's the problem. And maybe you've gone through a lot of trauma. Maybe you've gone through a lot in your life where you lost a lot. So you feel like, man, God don't love me. Like, I can understand that. You get what I'm saying? But what they say, like, God don't put people through things that they can't handle. So, and I believe in that. Like, because a lot of things in my life I've gone through it, and I've felt better about it. Like, I've dealt with it better. I could have dealt with it better. If I chose those times to believe in him and to trust in him to get me through things, instead of relying on my own belief to get me through these things, and my own thoughts, and my own, my own mind to get me through things. I should have trusted in him. Things could have been a lot smoother, So I think that's the issue with people. It's rebellion, and it's going through so much suffering, like they talk about in this video. So going through so much suffering and trauma that you just feel like nobody loves you, nobody's on your side, But other than that, man, you gotta feel that there's a God out here.
I don't trust that church.
But so for instance, what type of evidence would you be expecting to hear by people who do not care about those Christians? So for instance, the people in power in Rome, why would they be writing some, incredible long tales about we are going to kill the Christians because of this, and this, so that we
this
can
goes both
now
ways, right? Why would the enemies report these martyrdom stories?
Right, exactly.
I could say, why wouldn't Christian writers be motivated to make such stories up? What I'm saying is that goes both ways. We don't know what actually happened. All we have is a tradition, a biased tradition that seeks to establish their martyrdom that tells us that that's what's
But we can know that they wouldn't want to just make this up, because some of them also were killed. And when we now track that time later, there are saints in the 200s, 300s, 400s that are killed for having this thing.
But crucially, they're not the eyewitnesses. They're not the people who supposedly saw this happen. So they could easily just be mistaken.
Agreed. But what I am saying is that if those people in the 200s, 300s, 400s are saying that the eyewitnesses were killed, and they are holding to this same faith, and they are willing also to be killed, do you not think that this says something?
If indeed that is what happened, it means that they heard that the disciples died for their beliefs. That's all we can know. We don't know whether that's true. We don't know whether that's accurate.
Yes, but
by the way, I'm not saying that they didn't.
Right.
I'm just saying that we don't know. In other words, I'm happy to just grant that the disciples did believe in the resurrection of Jesus and that they died for their beliefs. What I'm saying is that when people throw this out as if it's a historically attested fact, it's simply not.
So what happened on Easter morning?
I don't know.
There's only one other option other than obviously that Christ rose from the dead. I would ascertain, and you can disagree if you feel free. It would be that his disciples, people who truly loved him, stole his body and somehow disposed of it.
Well, it could have been somebody else who stole the body.
But what motivation would they have to steal the body and dispose of it?
Grave robbing was quite popular in that time.
But there were guards,
around
remember?
that area. Well, there are guards that are only reported to Matthew. And what does Matthew say about the guards? He's the only person that reports the guards. And what do the guards do? They say that Jesus has disappeared, and the high priests pay the guards to tell people that the body's been stolen. Now, what does Matthew say? He says, and this is a rumor that they went and spread that persists to this day. So the author of Matthew knew that there were people who were saying that somebody stole the body, and intentionally puts these guards there, has this story of the high priest paying them off to spread this rumor in order to combat that rumor. So we know that people in the early church, before the writing of the Gospel of Matthew,
weren't in the impression
that the body was stolen. There's even, Tertullian talks about, this is amazing, Tertullian talks about a theory that some people were spreading that the gardener had stolen the body of Jesus because he didn't want people to come and spoil his lettuces when they came to see him as a shrine.
And I would agree that both seem illogical. But if we're just going to say that it was robbed, and then these disciples, this group of people, now are just not looking for the body, or that, again, which I would say is even more unlikely, that it is people who someone who did not care about Christ that now would steal his body, I feel like this would be also very illogical.
Well, there are theories that are suggesting, for example, that the authorities, either the Jewish or the Roman authorities, didn't want this to become some kind of shrine to believers of Jesus to go to after his death, and so they disposed of the body. There are all kinds of theories. Some people think that the body was eaten by dogs. Like, there's all kinds of things that could have happened, which seem pretty spurious and unlikely. But to me, if you're trying to tell me that a man rose from the dead, you're going to have to do a lot more in the way of getting rid of these other...
It would be the only clause that has an external force. Every other clause is also extremely illogical, but the clause where Christ raised from the dead has that external force, and that external force is God.
So can you tell
All
me
right,
why?
pause, guys. That's time.
My next assertion is that Jesus never claimed to be God.
So, man, Coley.
Coley. So talk to me. Where does Jesus claim to be God?
Yeah, so I'm curious, when you say that, are you including the book of John?
So I think that the book of John is probably the least historically reliable in this case. So I'm talking about the historical Jesus.
Yeah.
I do think that there are a number of instances where Jesus appears to claim to be God in John's gospel.
Okay.
But even if we think that he actually said that, I still think that there's reason to believe that he wasn't claiming to be God in the sense of being identical with Yahweh.
When you talk about the historical Jesus, what else do you pull from other than the Gospels of things that he might have said?
The things that he might have said, we only really have the Gospels, but
Okay.
there are multiple sources within the Gospels.
What do you date it at?
Around 70 AD.
Okay, yeah.
I sort of go with the scholarly consensus. And so you have also a bunch of sources, the unique sources to Matthew and Luke.
Yeah.
You also have this potential source called Q,
Yeah.
from the German for quell, right? All of this kind of stuff. John comes in the latest.
Sure.
And so when we're trying to figure out what the historical Jesus actually said, if we've got multiple sources all claiming that he said the same thing, then I think we have good reason to think that he actually said that. Claims like, before Abraham was, I am, I and the Father are one, anyone who's seen me has seen the Father, only appear in the Gospel of John, not in any of our other sources, which I think makes them less historically reliable.
Well, I like the claim. I got to come at it a little bit different approach because I think that the gospel writers are claiming that Jesus is God.
Sure.
Let's just go with Mark. As Mark starts, he talks about John the Baptist preparing the way for the Lord. Right? What is your response for that? Because ensuing Jesus comes.
I've no problem saying that Mark is intending to portray Jesus as God. It's not entirely clear, but I have no problem just granting that for the sake of this conversation. I think that the belief that Jesus is God is something that developed in early Christianity after Jesus died. I think there's nothing that Jesus said himself that can make us confidently say that he was walking around claiming to be God.
What do you need in order to believe that Jesus is God? Because even if we take kind of this development in the Gospels, we can go before that. So would you say Paul's letters like Philippians and Colossians, would you say they were written before the Gospels?
Yes, they were written before the Gospels.
So if we're going before the Gospels, we have Paul claiming that Jesus is God in Philippians 2, where he's saying was in the form of God, or maybe like a better translation would even be the essence or the nature of God.
Yeah, the problem I think with sort of quote mining in this respect is that there are quotes that point us in either direction, even in the Gospel of John. So Paul, for example, says that there is one God, which is the Father, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, seeming to separate them. Jesus says things like, my Father is greater than I am. He says things like, nobody knows the hour, not even the Son knows the hour, but only my Father in heaven. He says when he's crucified in the first two Gospels, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, my God, why have you forsaken me? I could point to these and say, these are Jesus claiming that he's separate from God.
Well, there is a distinction from the Father and the Son. So
Sure.
we're not, but instead of quote mining, I could just quote the whole thing. That though he was in the form of God, didn't count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men.
Sure. So I also have no problem saying that Paul thought that Jesus was God.
Okay,
But
so
my assertion is that Jesus
that's actually
claims to be
super
God.
clarifying for me, because then my question is, what piece of evidence do you now need in order to believe that Jesus claim to be God? Like, what is it for you that you would be like, you know what, that convinces me?
Jesus, in his own words, saying that
I would say this, bro. In the beginning, I'm talking about Genesis. It says, damn, this feel good. I ain't gonna lie to you. Hold up. Oh, man. I forgot what I was doing for a second. Oh, man. Sheesh. In the beginning was the Word. In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was God. And the Word was with God. That's what it says. I'm tired, so yeah. The Word was the Son, Jesus, or Yahusha. I call him Yahusha. He was the Word. Anytime God spoke in the Bible or was seen in the Old Testament, it was actually the Son, Yahusha. He was there. He was the one speaking. He was the one in the flesh or in the light, like in the burning bush, it was Yahusha. It wasn't God. So he was there from the beginning. So he's not God. He's separate from God, but he is God's son. Like he's always been there with God from the beginning. He wasn't just born from Mary and that's when he started. No, he'd been there from the beginning. So when you read the scriptures again, read it in that way, that he is the Word. Every time you see God speaking, that is actually Yahusha speaking.
I am God.
Right, but he does that in John.
Where?
Before Abraham was, I am.
Sure, so before Abraham was, I am. For a start, as I've
Before
said, it only
Abraham
appears in
was,
the Gospel
I
of John.
am.
We don't know if the
But
historical
he at least
Jesus
said it once, and the
But
claim
if
is that he never did.
If he actually said that, if he was going around claiming to be God in explicit terms,
That's a great...
why
yeah.
is it that none of the other Gospel writers thought it was a relevant detail to mention?
It's difficult to
Who
not
cares,
deal with
bro?
it because you are acknowledging...
Okay, pause. I'm so sorry.
Oh,
You've
no,
been
that's
voted
great.
out by
Hey,
the majority.
Tradition developed.
Probably fairly early on. I mean, the writings of Paul are decades after Jesus' death.
Okay, so do we have a better source for knowing what Jesus actually claimed than the Gospels?
No, we don't.
Okay, so if the Gospels are indeed the best source for understanding who Jesus was, do those Gospels portray him as a divine person?
Well, like I say, I think that there's only one gospel that unambiguously portrays Jesus as himself claiming to be divine, and that's the Gospel of John, which is the latest and most theologically motivated of all of the Gospels. Even then, the claims that we're talking about, things like, before Abraham was, I am, the Greek term there is ego eimi. One chapter later, in John chapter 9, Jesus heals a blind man, and the blind man goes back, and people say, were you not the man who was born blind? And what does he say? Ego eimi, I am. It's also just a way of identifying yourself and saying, it's me.
I would want to know then, in the Synoptic Gospels,
Yes.
are they claiming that Jesus is just a mere man?
I think that it's debatable what the synoptic authors are doing, but I'm
You've
happy
seen
to
that
grant that
cut?
the
They
synoptic
cut right
authors
there.
were trying to portray Jesus as God and thought
Okay,
that Jesus was God. I have
so
no
so
problem
that
saying
means all four Gospel writers were intending to portray Jesus as God.
That
Is
may be the
correct?
case, yeah.
Okay. Now, in the first century Hebrew culture,
He finna cook.
do you
He finna
worship
cook.
anyone other than God?
Depends what you mean by worship. So the Greek word for worship used in the New Testament is, I don't know how to pronounce it, proskynene or proskunene, something like that, which typically
You're
in
just
the
trying to let us know how
Hebrew
much you know,
is
bro.
translated
Just
in
answer
the
the question, bro.
Septuagint to that word, proskunene. In the Hebrew is a word which just means something like bow down before. So for example, the same word is used when Jacob bows down before Esau. The same word is used when Joseph's brothers bow down before him when he's the governor of Egypt. The same word is used for King David, for example, in multiple books of the Bible.
But in the Synoptic Gospels, is Jesus portrayed as being worshipped?
I think at some points, yes. So, for example, at the end of John's Gospel with Doubting Thomas, at the beginning in the birth narratives, of course, I think the birth narratives were forged in later additions to the New Testament.
I want to focus entirely on the Synoptic Gospels because those seem to be the one that you think are the most shaky on this.
Fine by
In
me.
the Synoptic Gospels, is the charge of blasphemy given against Jesus?
Yes.
Absolutely, right?
Yes, yeah.
Can you be given the charge of blasphemy merely for claiming to be the Messiah?
Well, let's find out. In the book of Acts, St. Stephen has a vision before the Pharisees. What vision does he have? He looks up before the Pharisees and he says, I can see God and I can see Jesus sat at the right hand of God. Separating Jesus and God, what do the Pharisees do? They stone him to death for blasphemy. So we know that you didn't have to claim that Jesus was
Why'd you put a
identical to
flag up
God
for?
in order to be stoned for blasphemy.
How about judging the entire world? Is that something that a human would do?
I suppose it'd have to be a very special kind of human. I understand that you think that only God can judge, sure.
So did the
hold on,
Synoptic Gospels portray Jesus as the one who is going to judge the world?
I think that may be true. The Synoptic Gospels may portray him as being that. What I'm asking for is, in Jesus' own words, or indeed in his own actions, claiming to be God. For example, a moment ago you said that he was stoned for blasphemy. Can he be stoned for blasphemy for doing something other than claiming to be God? In the book of Acts, St. Stephen is stoned for exactly that. So do you agree that that, at least, isn't an indication that Jesus is claiming to be God?
I don't know that they necessarily were stoning him for that exact thing. I don't know the exact context of that. With that in mind, the divine birth of Jesus is another factor that's in all the Synoptic Gospels. In those Gospels, Jesus is born of a Virgin Mary and the Holy Spirit.
It's only in two of the Synoptic Gospels, and in Luke's, at least, is probably a later edition. It wasn't in the original version.
That's true. He never
Regardless,
did claim to be
is
God.
Jesus' birth portrayed as a normal human birth?
No, not at all.
In all of the Synoptics. So if he's not a man, then
only
what?
two of them.
Well, that's fine. If he's not a man in these Gospels, then what is he?
Well, again, I'm happy to say that the Synoptic authors were portraying Jesus as God, especially whoever added the birth narrative to Luke after the fact. I've got no problem with that.
You just don't trust those Gospels?
But, no, in the same way that I don't trust the legendary accounts surrounding the birth of Alexander the Great.
Okay.
I don't think that he was God either.
Is there a better, more reliable source for the historical Jesus than the Gospels?
No. But within the Gospels, there are more and less historically reliable points. So as I've already said, when he says Eli, good fun. Nice to meet you. How's it going?
I'm Lori Mills.
Alex,
Nice to meet
nice
you.
to meet you.
I'm not a fan because I don't know who you are, but...
All the better. Well, the feeling is mutual.
Yes, but anyways, so the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Yeah, I don't know a ton about them, but...
Okay, well, they were found in 1943. It is proven that they are about 2,300 years old, and you've got your Bible there. Do you know when crucifixion started?
When crucifixion started?
Yes.
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so the Israelites, for instance, in King David's time, if you were found of blasphemy, how would they kill you?
Well, there are different ways of doing it. You could be stoned, for example. And who's they? Is it?
Well, the Pharisees.
Because of course the ones that killed Jesus, and they didn't kill him for theological reasons.
So would you do me a favor?
Sure.
Open up Psalms 22.
Whatever you like. Psalms.
King David wrote this.
Psalms 22.
Would you read it?
From the beginning?
Sure.
My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you...
What did Jesus say on the cross?
My God, why have you forsaken me?
Go on.
Why are you so far from saving me, so far from my cries of anguish? My God, I cry out day by day, but you do not answer. By night I find no rest. Yet you are enthroned as the Holy One. You are the one Israel praises. What are you looking for here?
Well, basically, if you go on, it basically describes crucifixion to the T.
Sure.
Written
can I just stop you there? Because
no, but let me finish. Written 800 years before crucifixion ever even happened. It even gets into the Lamai, Lama.
What has that got to do with Jesus claiming to be God?
Well, what this has to do with it is I believe that the entirety of the Word of God, just like in John chapter 1, the Word became flesh and made its dwelling amongst us.
Yep. See, that's what I said. He is the Word, and the Word became flesh. Man, I'm cooking, bro. I've been cooking, dog.
I believe the entire Bible points to Jesus being the Messiah.
I agree with you.
So that is my point.
The Messiah is not the same as God. Jews didn't believe that the Messiah was going to be God.
Well,
Okay, pause. Sorry, Lori, you've been voted out.
Dang, they got her
Very
out
nice
of
to
the
meet
quick.
you.
But she was cooking, though. She was cooking for me. Hey. Oh, yeah.
What are you charging? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Learning more about our God, that knowing like what happened in the Old Testament, he needed to have a representative to humble himself during these trials of the early beginnings of the Old Testament.
For the sake of time, I really need Jesus claiming to be God.
So my point is that he sent Jesus to be that human figure to represent God so he could humble himself in his own creation.
So where does Jesus say that I am that person? I am God?
When he claims to say, I am the light, I am the way, follow me, I am your God. When
He says, I am your God.
I am the light. I feel like
Sure, he says that, but you just said, I am your God. I don't think Jesus says that.
my apologies on misrepresenting like the whole entirely of the words in that verse, but he's still claiming that he is the light that has that connection to that higher God.
Absolutely.
And I feel like with that connection
to that higher God.
Like that.
yes, that he is in that physical form. I also want to say with the Virgin Mary, he has no father, and the angel blessed him with what he was saying.
According to
earlier.
two mythical birth narratives.
Yes.
Which, by the way, the Gospels
I
don't
wanna
seem to
ask
have
what
any
your
knowledge
opi-
of. Well, hold on. With the virgin birthing that's come up twice now, At one point, Jesus' family, in Mark's gospel, Jesus' family come out to him and say that they think he lost his mind, which is a very strange thing for his family to say if there was a virgin birth that was known about.
And for the sake
I
of
can't tell if
flags,
she's
I just
Christian
want to
or
emphasize
Catholic.
that Jesus is that human
Look at her
God
shirt
form,
and
that
look at
he
her
needed to
necklace.
humble himself so he can truly understand how humans work.
I just want to know
What
how
is
you know that was Jesus.
I want to emphasize that as well, just by the very teachings that he said and how
All
his
right, pause. You've been voted out. Please
Get to your
return to your
shirt.
seat. Yes.
Yes, Lord.
So,
baby
my
shirt for
claim,
10 minutes.
which might bother some people in this circle, and this is why I thought maybe we could find a little bit of middle
That's how
ground
we
here.
like it.
Because I represent a form of Christianity that a lot of people don't even consider as Christian.
Uh-huh.
I'm a Latter-day Saint, also
Aha.
known as a Mormon.
Awesome.
And my claim is that the restored gospel, also known as Mormonism, provides a conception of God that is more rationally defensible than any other creedal Christian sect.
Okay. Oh, tell me why. I must admit, I don't know very much about Mormon
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's all about the Israelites, so I don't know about all the Christianity. I ain't Christian or none of that other stuff. So, but yeah, you see what I'm on. You see where I'm taking the culture. You know what I'm saying? You see where I'm going with it. You know. So stay tuned. Watch this video. I appreciate you if you made it this far to the video, man. Yeah, man, that's what I'm on. I'm trying to do. I'm trying to venture to different things. You know what I'm saying? So y'all have a good night, man, or good morning, or good afternoon, whatever time you started watching this. Yiddy.